serves as North American CEO for Wunderman Thompson West, and there are a few members of her team here today. She is also recognized for her service in leadership to Starbucks China as CMO, to Intercontinental Hotels Group as Chief Commercial Officer, and as the first executive in China for Apple Retail. Emily splits time between Los Angeles and Shanghai, enjoying her life with her husband of 23 years and their 14-year-old daughter and 2 rescue dogs. One of the many things Emily is doing, we are very, very grateful that she chose to join us here in St. Louis today. Can you join me in giving a warm welcome to Emily Chang?
Thank you so much for having me. It is such a privilege to be with you today. Bear with me, we're working on laptop. I started praying about this months ago and thinking about what would be useful for me to share today with you all. And this verse that Mandy introduced really started to come to life for me. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. So come with me on this journey as I started to look at each word, and it started to teach me. For instance, you are the light of the world. This is my daughter, and I look at her and I just think she is the light of the world. And I think about how much I love her as her mother, and I am this failure, sinful human being, right? And I feel this for her. Imagine how God looks at us as the light of the world. You are the light of the world. He doesn't say you might be the light of the world. He doesn't say you could one day be the light of the world. You are. Isn't that amazing? And he says you are the light of the world, not a light. You are the light. What does that mean? Oh, I hear my ears. There's a verse that says we are his workmanship. You know that verse? There's this word which is masterpiece. In Greek, it's poema. I think this is amazing. Do you believe we are made with intention, wisdom, and power? What God is saying is, you are my poetry. That is so beautiful. You are the light of the world. I started looking into this word light, and there are lots of translations. The Greek word is phos. That is the kind of light that is like a beacon. Well, when you do sound check, you don't really swing your head around, so we're just going to take this one off. A beacon is the kind of light that's like a lighthouse. So what does a lighthouse do? It warns of danger, and it signals safe harbor. You are the light, the lighthouse of the world. This guy, Charles Spurgeon, said something I thought was so interesting. He said, the Bible is not the light of the world. Because the world's not reading the Bible. The world is reading us. That's how we are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. Now, how many of you work in a non-Christian work environment? I think the majority. Right, me too. How can you be a light kind of sometimes in a dark place? So let's get practical. 1, John 15:5. Stay close to the vine. He says, I'm the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me bears much fruit, because without me you can do nothing. So staying close to him is where that light comes from. Practically, we can show our faith. We can show God's light. How many are in an actual workplace with a desk again? Oh my gosh, okay. Well, I live in California. It's harder to get people back. That's great. So, you all have the chance to put photos up. You can show the people you love, the places you've been. Those are thought starters. I'm curious, how many of you have a tattoo, at least one? Oh, that's a lot. Okay, keep your hands up. Now, how many of you would say that tattoo means nothing? Put your hands down. Oh, so it turns out everybody who has a tattoo stands for something. A tattoo is a story waiting to be told, isn't it? You had to think hard about what you wanted to ink on your body forever. One of mine is this little guy here, and it's Endian, which in Chinese means grace. One of the kids I had in my spare room is named Lotus. So if you've read the book, she's the daughter of a prostitute. She wasn't only raised in a brothel, she was raised in one room from the time she was a baby where her mother served clients, and her dad was the pimp. So of all the children we've cared for, all 17, last night it was reminded 18, she was the most difficult. And there were days that she would just poke me to see if I would still love her. She would flirt with my husband because that's what she saw in life. And you just had to keep remembering grace. And grace to me became a very meaningful word. It is not just kindness. It's not just generosity. It's sort of a generosity beyond human understanding. It is a kindness extended beyond what you can humanly give. And that's why it's here, because you can only extend grace when you're pointed to God. So what's on your skin? And what do you say? There are so many ways to bring God into the workplace in ways that are not offensive, right? You can talk about your weekend. People can walk right by if you say something like, oh, after church, we went hiking. I got to tell you about this great place. They can catch the church part if they want and engage with you, but no one's going to be offended. Because when you're a senior leader, it's hard to kind of say, are you a Christian? You kind of have to find clever ways to do it. I'm taking the day off too. What about inviting people into your home? So on the upper right is my Starbucks team. And Starbucks in China is a tough place to work. China's a tough place to work. It's 24/7. And one of these girls had come to me with hands shaking early one day. And she said, I just need to go get a quick blood transfusion. I'll be back in an hour. And I was like, what is a quick blood transfusion? And she said, well, I don't eat, enough, and I'm not sleeping. I sleep under my desk most days, so I'm just really weak. I need iron. And I said, just please go home. But she wouldn't go home because she'd been taught to work and work and work. And when I tried to coach her, it didn't land. But it was only when I brought her in my home and she saw how we lived, and she kind of was suffused with a little bit of that peace and joy that she saw maybe there's a different way to live. On the left-hand side is my leadership team at my last job at McCann, where I was the CEO. And I brought them in my home, and we create these opportunities for shared experiences, rituals. This is a Singaporean experience where you bring in all these different bits of food that represent different wishes for the year ahead. Everybody sticks their chopsticks in, and when you shout, you throw the food up in the air and toss it together. Very messy. Husband was not pleased, but it was a wonderful shared experience. A great shared experience is traveling together. This is the team that I worked with at Apple. There are just some silly moments. Those are the moments where, you kind of say, oh, Lisa, about that meeting? Oh, Mandy, before I forget to tell you about that project. And then after a while, you're like, do you have any kids? What'd you do on vacation? And then you start to build human connection. So when you can, create shared experiences, travel together. Those are the moments that who you live for and how you live really come to life. The other thing is, there's this book called The Spare Room, and I'm going to help unpack a little bit your spare room. The subtitle of this book is very unsexy, but I wanted it to be transparent, which is helping readers define their social legacy so that they could live with more intention and lead, if you're a leader, with authentic purpose. Those are a lot of words that we throw around a lot. Purpose, authenticity. What do they mean? I believe words have power when we're specific about their meaning. So for me, I thought about this. For me, purpose is the intention that underpins your action. It's your reason for being. And I wasn't born with purpose. People often ask, how did you start this spare room? I didn't, God did. And I mean, honestly, I had to have 6 or 7 kids in my spare room before I'm like, this seems to be a trend. Is this a thing? How come these kids keep showing up in my house? And then this one kid, Teo, was the one who really helped me and my family define and kind of own into that purpose. And if you've seen the TED Talk or read the book, I apologize for the repeat, but this kid only came into our house to die. He'd been born with hydrocephalus, which is where your cerebrospinal fluid goes up, but it can't come back down, and so your soft baby skull swells painfully and becomes filled with liquid. It becomes so heavy it can't move. Your head becomes so swollen your eyes can't shut. And if you've ever seen a CAT scan, you know what it looks like. There's a skull and it's filled with a big old brain. This is what his CAT scan looked like. So you can see all his brain was gone. It was empty. We tried and tried to find him a permanent home, and we never could. So ultimately we decided to adopt him. And that's when the doctors advised against it. They said, he can't understand anything you say. He has no brain. He can't ever speak. He has no pituitary, he can't stand, he can't balance. And we just didn't agree with that. We just saw a light in his eyes, and we said, you know what, God has put him in our life for a reason. We're not abandoning him. And he started to turn around, and you can see that light in his eyes. My husband holding this iPad every day to kind of get his eyes to track. My daughter teaching him to roll over with that heavy head so that he could gain mobility. He couldn't stand up, so we learned to take all our photos lying down. And then she was convinced, she said, he can't move, but his arms work. I am gonna teach him to hold his bottle. And my 5-year-old did. And then finally, after some surgeries, he could lift his head up, and this little cutie joined us for meals. We sent him off to school. Those taxis back in the day didn't have seatbelts, so my daughter was his human seatbelt. And then one day he outgrew the biggest stroller I could find, and so we converted him to the smallest wheelchair we could find. Look how proud he is. He started to do therapy. The bubble wrap is optional. My husband was just being silly. And then this kid who was never supposed to be able to sit or understand anything took his first step one day in our lobby. And then his dream, every time we went by the playground, I couldn't let him in there because the kids are so rough, he's so delicate, but when he turned 5, we said, Laney's gonna help you up, and he got to go on the playground. That was his 5-year-old birthday. We had him on and off for 5 years. And then, a long story, I don't have time today, he ended up with this family, the McClures. They're amazing. They're the McClures, we're the Changs, so we've become this, God-created family we call ourselves the McChangs. And the McChangs had a reunion 2 months ago. This is Teo and Lainey dancing, singing and dancing. And I'm sorry to say he sings Justin Bieber, but he was singing. So if purpose is the intention that underpins your behavior, I think authenticity is the character that underpins our behavior. If purpose is sort of the reason for being, then authenticity is your sincereness of being. So how do we ensure that we are authentic? Because we're not, we're just, we're sinful, we fail. How can we try to live as authentically as possible? I'll introduce this idea of social legacy. So on one side, it's kind of a simple Venn diagram. I studied engineering, so this is how I think. Like Venn diagrams and XY axes, it's very sexy. On one side, you have your offer, which is that unique package of who you were designed to be. Your personality traits, your experience, your resources, your capabilities. And on the other side is your offense. Lots of things in the world are wrong. Lots of things offend you. But there's probably one thing that really stops you in your tracks that makes you think somebody has to do something about that. Do you know what that thing is? Because if you know what these two things are, that intersection is what I'm calling your social legacy. Legacy is leaving something better than you found it. Social defines the space in which you want to have that impact. It's a little hard to understand, so I'm going to share quickly mine. When you do all the exercises in the book, you start with, what are the resources you have? I have space, I have hospitality, and something I don't take for granted is a unified family willing to do a lot of things and follow me on adventures. When I'm at my best, not every day, I laid out my personality traits and some of the business skills that I bring outside of work. And then I really had to think about, how do I define my offense? And I kind of said, it's children and young people who are abused, neglected, vulnerable, or marginalized. And so I thought my social legacy was the spare room. I wrote a book titled The Spare Room, until I started my own exercises, and I thought, no, the spare room is actually the space. My social legacy is good kibun. So we had a South Korean boy who didn't speak English, but he spoke Korean and Chinese. It was a really interesting household for 6 months. One day, he finished dinner and burped loudly as his way to express his appreciation. Still not used to that. And then he said, this house, good kibun. And I said, Jeshin, what is kibun? And he couldn't find the words, but basically he described it as a comfort for the spirit. I feel like, those tuning fork moments, if you're a musician, you hit the tuning fork and it resonates. I had a tuning fork moment. I was like, that is my social legacy. That's what I want to create. I remember my friend's little daughter used to come into our house and lay on the couch and she'd go, and I'm like, what is Alicia doing? And she's like, she is smelling your couch. I was like, that's where all our butts sit. And she was like, I know, but she loves the smell of your house. Do you know what she loves? She loved that comfort for the spirit. It smelled like something safe to her. And then it began to transcend the way I think about leading at work. I want to create comfort for the spirit at work. I run Wonderman Thompson. It's a creative data technology agencies, so many diverse people. It's just people. There's no product, there's no supply chain. We're not just people. In fact, we're energy. So how do I bring that energy to work? Now, we all went under COVID lockdown at one point or another. In China, it was extreme. We were locked into our homes, and homes are sometimes the size of this small piece of the stage, without kitchens. People were going hungry. There were locks on the doors. There were drones flying overhead. It was a little dystopian. And so what we were trying to do was care for our people. We would do pet happy hours. People would meet each other's pets. Every day, one of the leaders would go online and teach a different exercise. I mean, this is called angel, or prayer. You literally do this and you lift. I promise you, do this 20 times and you can't move. So there are lots of things you can do. And what was interesting to me was these posters that were made by a mid-level HR manager. She wrote, "We are family, we are together," and look at the visuals. What that told me is, if you live with purpose and authenticity, that social legacy starts to transcend your organization. That was a joy for me. So that, to me, is what it is to live with purpose and authenticity. And then to recap how to be a light, what were the things we talked about? Show who you are, say where you invest your time, invite people in your home, travel together, define your social legacy. So that's that piece about you are the light of the world. Now here's the next part. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Okay, let's look at the city. It's in Italy. So here's what's interesting. Let's look at that little house up there with the light. Let's say that light starts to flicker. What do you think's happening from down here? You guys might say, they must be having a party. You guys might say, somebody's in danger, right? You don't know exactly what's happening way up there on the hill. So that's kind of the point. When you are a city on a hill, you're way up there, and you have to live above reproach. Integrity has to take the higher ground. Have you heard of the headline test? What would happen if your actions today were reflected in tomorrow's headlines? Makes me think twice sometimes. But actually, I think about it like the hill test. If you were up on a hill, it's not just about, I'm not doing anything wrong. You start thinking, I care deeply about the people I get to lead. What might they see and interpret? So I did an executive program at Harvard Business School one year, and there are people from all over the world. And I'm wearing heels, but I'm like 5'1", and I was with these Northern Europeans, and this one gentleman was so cute, happily married, kids. He thought it was really funny to kick his leg over my head. And he would just keep doing that. I was like, that's really kind of annoying. Not a great view. But he was also really just this happy guy. He would grab my hand and skip. I couldn't even remember how to skip. And at first I thought he was so cute and whimsical, and then one day I just remember having this hill moment. Like, what if somebody saw me holding his hand? How does that look? I know him, he's just a very cute little boy who happens to be grown up. But I stopped holding his hand. I was like, no offense. I just, I feel like it might give the wrong impression. Sometimes those take a little bit of intention and a little bit of courage. So are you running your hill test? And the last part of that, a city on a hill cannot be hidden. Isn't that interesting? We can't hide in those difficult moments. If I put a flashlight and turn it on right now, you would barely see the light because it's really bright. But in a dark room, that flashlight shines. So we, to be a light, should be actively pursuing the dark places. That is what it is to be a city on a hill. And the thing that's amazing is that light cannot be hidden. I'll tell you another story. When I was at Apple, it was not a very pleasant place. I came from 11 years at this warm company called Procter & Gamble. And at Apple, you can be anything, you can believe anything, except sort of being an out loud Christian. That was Steve Jobs days. And after 3 months, I was praying. I was doing my quiet time in the office. This was part of my team. And I remember saying, God, why am I here? There isn't a single Christian. Did you hear that? That's naive, right? But I just said, I hate it here. If you don't show me at least one person I can pour into. It's not a great posture, by the way. God, if you don't, But anyway, I was immature. If you don't show me somebody I can pour into, like willing to get in a Bible study with me, I'm resigning. And then I went over, again, not a great ending to quiet time, and I went to go pour coffee, and there was this young lady there, and she was standing next to me, And eventually she started to kind of ask me some questions. And I thought about my prayer and the gauntlet I threw down to God. And so I just decided to lean into it. And I said, do you know what? I'm a Christian, are you? And she said, yes. And I said, do you want to do a Bible study? And she burst into tears. She said, do you know, I was just sitting at my desk crying because I hate it here. And I had just said to God, if you don't show me somebody who is going to be a Christian, you can't make this stuff up, right? If you don't show me a person who is willing to pour into me and invite me to a Bible study, I'm quitting. So we stood there over our coffee and looked at each other, and I kind of said, well, I'll stay if you'll stay. And then this Bible study grew into 11 people, and we would sit in an office in the corner and pray over everybody, praying goodness and love in such a dark place. And there were these people who would watch us and didn't say anything. Some would join us. And I'll tell you, to this day, Apple Retail China is led by Christians, only place in the world. And 6 years later, one of these ladies who sat next to that office reached out to me. She said, I need to talk to you. I said, this is my night. I have a business dinner, I have drinks, and then after that I have another drinks, all the business meetings that happen. I can't see you till 11, thinking she'll push till the next week. She's like, okay, 11 works. I was like, oh, okay. Okay. So I get there at 11, and in my head I have a little bit of a bad attitude. I'm like, what could possibly be so important? She sits down, hugs me, and she orders champagne, and I said, oh, what are we celebrating? I barely know her. And she goes, I said, oh, you've gotten engaged. In my head, I'm like, why am I celebrating with you? So I asked her, why did you choose to celebrate with me? I'm delighted. And then she said, well, as I said yes to him, I started to think, what kind of couple are we going to be? And as I thought, of all the people I know, you and your husband came to mind. And all those years you guys were doing that Bible study thing, I'd never participated, but I think that God is why your marriage is different. So, can you tell me about God? What a privilege that God let me see where that seed took root. Because how many times, ladies, have we done something and never known? But remember that story, because all things work for good. So when we are light, amazing things happen. That goes to God. And the thing is, it sounds tiring, because it was like 1 a.m. I was now drunk, because I had 2 happy hours and champagne. I was like, good Lord, I want to go home. But it's not tiring, it's a joy, because we are not the source of light, right? The sun is the light, the moon is gorgeous, but actually only because it reflects the sun. That's us. We just get to reflect his beauty. Easiest, best job in the world. Okay, so last part is you are the salt of the earth. What does that mean? Salt enhances taste, right? When I think about Lotus, the girl who was the daughter of the prostitute, I think we got to be the salt in her life. She can read words on paper, but she can feel a different kind of mothering, a different kind of family love. Salt also preserves, because in the old days, before refrigerators, you would catch fish, and if you didn't pack them in salt, they would spoil. So salt is really important. In fact, salt was super valuable. It's how people paid each other. That's where the word salary comes from. Cool, right? So here's the interesting thing. While salt is very valuable, it's not by itself. It doesn't exist for itself. Salt doesn't salt itself. Salt doesn't salt. Say that 10 times fast. Salt is what preserves the food. So we're not the food. Jesus is the food. We get to be the salt. And then I was thinking, okay, so that's a lot of thoughts about light and about salt. If we want to sprinkle salt and shine light, here's something interesting about how salt and light work together. Salt prevents decay. Light dispels darkness. Salt works secretly in the dark places. Light works openly. And salt works from within, and then light works from without. It's cool, huh? That's why I came up with these little funny gifts to give you guys. I was like, after you leave these types of things, you go to work, you can very quickly forget everything and be like, oh, work. So there are these little things. It's like a little salt and light you can bring and put by your desk. These are all the things we talked about today. Identify God's purpose for you. Stay close to that vine where the branches. Show who you are. Say what you do. Define your social legacy. Run that hill test with how you are living above reproach. trying to shine, reflect, flavor, and preserve. I want to end with one last story about what living with salt and light can look and feel like. In 2002, I went to China to work for the first time. I was in Guangzhou. There was this spicy little girl from Hong Kong. She came to me in the hallway, and I just moved there. First time in China, first time promoted, lots of changes. I had a kid in my spare room from America who didn't even have a passport. There was a lot going on, but she didn't care. She was like, "You're a Christian, right?" And I was like, "Yes." She's like, "Well, I mean, you've been here 3 months. Why haven't you started a Bible study?" I was like, "Well, I'm kind of busy." And then I thought about it, and I was like, no, that's why God puts me in the workplace, right? That's what we talked about. This is our harvest field. So I started it. Those days were tough, 2002. It was illegal. Lots of stuff happened I can tell you about later. But after I left, do you know that side of the floor? I was the Pantene brand manager. She was on Rejoice, which is like Per Plus. Herbal Essences, Head and Shoulders, Vital Sassoon, every single one of them came to know Jesus. And by the way, the Procter & Gamble building in Guangzhou is actually where the communists met on the weekends and would do the interrogations. What do you believe? What is your religion? Who taught you that? That's what God did. And when I left P&G to go back to the States, I was still at P&G, different job. Juliana picked up. And this was us 7 years later with our babies. That's Juliana. Remember Jessica from Apple? That's Jessica in 2013. And then there's another woman, she picked up the Apple leadership after I left. There's a woman named Stephanie who I met at Intercontinental Hotels Group, and I brought her with me to Starbucks. And then at one point, just 2 years ago, I was living in Seattle, and I woke up, and my texts had blown up, hundreds, and I thought, what happened last night in China? You know, different time zones. And what happened was these 3 women, Stephanie, Jessica, and Juliana, ended up at some event in Malaysia. None of them knows each other. Juliana's talking. She's like, "There's this woman who really poured into me and at P&G, and she's really loud, and you know, she did a lot of things." And then Jessica went over. She's like, "Are you Juliana? Emily's told me about you." And she started to talk about Apple, and Juliana said, "You're Jessica?" And then this woman came running from the back who has really broken English. She's like, "I'm Stephanie!" And they're like, "Who are you?" Because she was the new one. And they took this picture, and do you know the headline they sent to me? They sent me this photo, and they said, "We are your legacy." Y'all, I could have died that day. I could have died that day and been like, that's heaven on earth. That is shining light and living as salt. So I have a lot more stories, and we'll still have plenty of time later. I had to go late flight, so I'll be out as long as you all want. I just want to say thank you so much for listening to my stories, and here are some ways that you can stay connected. Be blessed.